This is it. You've made it. This is our last lecture, and we have come a long way. You know how to properly taste wine, how to open wine bottles, even champagne, and how to identify noble grape varieties in the glass. You also have a better understanding of how your palate works, how to predict what others may like, wines from all over the world, and strategies for buying. Today's lecture is about wines for any occasion, which means we get to talk about food. It was a food pairing that stirred my passion for wine, and understanding pairings can help bring your enjoyment of both food and wine to new heights. You're going to need the following wines for today: a champagne, non-vintage champagne, an oaked Chardonnay, a Cabernet Sauvignon, a Pinot Noir, and a Ruby Port. You're also going to need the following food items: French fries or potato chips, sliced roast beef from the deli, or, as I have here, prepared filet mignon, sliced roasted chicken from the deli, or homemade roasted chicken, or you can pick up a rotisserie chicken from the supermarket, spicy barbecue sauce, salted almonds, and chocolate. I also have here with me some simply prepared dishes with food and wine pairing in mind. I offered you quick alternatives in the list I gave you just in case you didn't feel like cooking. So here we've also got seared scallops, and as I mentioned, oven roasted chicken and filet mignon. Before we begin, I have to say this: food and wine pairing isn't easy. You'll learn some of the basics here, but this is just the foundation for you to create some great pairings of your own. For many, food and wine pairing is a new experience, and it can take a long time to learn. I'm still learning myself every time I taste a food and wine together. The good news is that it's a skill that you can use your whole life. Uncovering and discovering new pairings can create an entirely new sensual experience for you and those you share them with. You may even find that at the end of this lecture that there are things you never dreamed of putting together that work really well for you. I'll teach you some classic pairings, but remember, no two people perceive aromas and flavors the same way. I mean, seriously, I'm an identical twin, and my sister and I don't even taste exactly the same way. So let's start with some food and wine basics. There are two main actions in food and wine pairings: complementing and contrasting. You've probably heard of this before, but complement and contrast what? You complement and contrast the three things that food and wine share in common: weight, texture, and flavors. I remember these together because the first letter of each word spells WTF, which is not allowed in civil emails, but hey, it helps me remember it. Firstly, weight. Both food and wine have weight. In wine, we call it body. You want to match or complement the weight of the food with the weight of the wine. Match body with body. Here I have some roasted chicken that's been prepared simply. So let's taste it. Notice how it's medium-bodied. If you tasted this in comparison to, let's say, shellfish or red meat, you're going to notice that chicken is kind of somewhere in between there. But really what I want you to do is take notice of the weight of the chicken in your mouth. Now what I want you to do is taste the champagne. Did that match in terms of its weight? Is it too light, or is it just right, or is it too heavy? You're probably going to find it's a little bit light, unless, of course, you have a vintage champagne or a non-vintage champagne with a higher level of reserve wines in it, such as a Charles Heidsieck that has 40%. Now what I want you to do is taste the chicken and then taste the cab. Still with a little chicken in your mouth. What happened there? You may love Cabernet Sauvignon, but this totally overpowers the chicken. This is why it's so important to match weight with weight. The Cabernet Sauvignon is too rich and full-bodied for the medium body of the chicken, especially the way it's been prepared. Weight is the reason why you see the classic pairing of Dover Sole with the Muscadet, a wine we spoke about in Lecture 10. Both are delicate in weight, and the Muscatet's neutrality in flavors matches the neutrality of the Dovrasol. The next common thread that both food and wine share is texture. You can either complement textures or contrast them. Here I have a prepared filet mignon, and it's been prepared just very simply. Filet mignon is quite a lean piece of red meat, and the texture can be quite rich and full-bodied, so let's taste that. Much weightier than the chicken. Now what I want you to do is taste your Cabernet Sauvignon. We said that the Cabernet Sauvignon is rich and full-bodied, but feel the texture of those tannins. Now, unless you have a filet mignon prepared at home, I'll just ask you to taste the texture of the sliced roast beef you have. But really feel the texture and roll the roasted beef around your tongue and then taste the cab. Try to feel the texture of those tannins in the cab and how that matches the richness of the meat. Do you really see how they complement each other? This is an example of matching or complementing texture. In an earlier lecture, I mentioned the chemical reaction that happens when you combine a high tannin wine like Cabernet Sauvignon with a high protein food like red meat. The tannins combine with the protein and make the cab's tannins appear softer on your palate. Perhaps you noticed that the tannins seemed much softer after you took a bite of the roast beef. If not, pause the DVD, take a sip of water, wait a minute, and try the exercise again. Taste the cab first, then the roast beef, and then the cab, and see if you can perceive it. This response has fueled the rule that red wine goes with red meat. Now what I want you to do is taste the meat again, but I want you to taste the Pinot Noir. What happened there? The Pinot Noir is, as we discussed in our red noble grape variety lecture, is much lighter in body and much silkier in texture because of versus the tannins of the cab. And when you have the red meat, it just makes the Pinot Noir just be dilute, and it just loses its flavor completely. It makes the wine taste almost thin. So not all red wine pairs with red meat. Keep this in mind. Match power and texture and weight. However, remember the herb-crusted salmon and Sancerre I spoke of earlier? That is an example of contrasting textures. Salmon is a fatty, weighty fish, and Sancerre is a delicate Sauvignon Blanc from the Loire Valley. Though you don't match in texture, the pairing works despite the fact they're polar opposites. In this case, the wine's acidity cleanses the fat from your tongue. The focus isn't on the texture or the weight, but on the interaction between the wine and the fish. The wine forces your mouth to focus on the cleansing sensation, which makes you feel prepared to take that next delicious bite. In order to kind of show you how this works, here I have some French fries and potato chips, or crisps, as they say in the UK. And what I want you to do is take a sip of your champagne first. Then I want you to take a taste of the French fry. And really make sure that you coat your tongue with the French fry or the potato chips. And make sure that you don't get the baked potato chips. I want you to have that oil to coat all around your tongue. Now taste the champagne again. Notice how the acidity is just cleaning your tongue from some of that fat. French fries are a little bit better for this, just because of the flavor combinations. Here you have the creaminess of the the flavors of the French fries. And thicker French fries are good for this because the potato in the fries is creamy, and you can really taste more of that autolytic character, that yeastiness, that biscuitiness in the champagne. But this is another example of where the textures are different, and yet they work. And the high acidity from the champagne not only invigorates your appetite, but it cleanses the tongue from the fat of the fries of the chips. That brings me to a specific point. Sometimes you're going to have to choose between emphasizing a wine's texture and flavor and whether you want to have a cleansing sensation. And this will depend on the amount of richness, or in other words, fat, that is in the food or in the sauce and which experience you want to have. For example, here I have scallops, prepared with a little olive oil and salt and seared in a pan. Sauvignon Blanc will match its texture and make you focus on the flavors of the scallop. The high acidity and fruitiness of the wine really brings out the sweetness that the searing brings to the scallop. But if I dress this scallop with a cream sauce, the high acid from the Sauvignon Blanc would indeed cleanse the palate of the fat from the cream. However, you would lose some of that beautiful richness of the fat and some of the creamy flavors. You may decide that you want to focus the pairing on the texture and the flavors of the cream. In order to do this, you would pair a wine that has a richer, maybe even a creamy texture, such as an oaked Chardonnay, one that's gone through lees stirring, or what we called bâtonnage, which we discussed in lecture 5 and 11. Lees stirring creates a creamy texture and mouthfeel in the wine. The creaminess in the Chardonnay will complement the richness in the cream sauce and help you focus on those flavors. Lastly, flavor can be complemented and contrasted. An example of complementing flavors would be, in my last example, the oaked Chardonnay, with something prepared with a cream sauce, whether fish or poultry, or perhaps even an Alfredo sauce on pasta. Especially if the wine has gone through, this Chardonnay has gone through malolactic fermentation. Remember, that's the process when malic acid, the acid you find in green apples, is turned into lactic acid, the acid you find in milk. But this also creates diacetyl, that buttery flavor that you get in wines. By pairing a wine like this with a cream sauce, you're matching and complementing the cream flavors of the sauce to the buttery, creamy flavors you get in the wine. Another example of matching flavors is having an oaked or high-toasted oaked wines with smoked foods. The stronger the smoke flavors of the food, the more you can match its intensity with the toasty and smoky flavors of the wine. For example, smoked meats can be complemented by a powerful, high-toasted American oaked Shiraz from Australia. Remember this if your family has richly smoked ham on the holidays. Complementing doesn't necessarily mean matching, though. Think of a Thanksgiving day and how most of the country pairs the turkey with cranberry sauce. Or think of pork chops with applesauce or lamb with mint jelly. This is complementing the flavors of the sauce with the main protein of the dish. You could do exactly the same thing with wine. I mean, I'm not a cranberry sauce or applesauce fan. I know, how un-American, right? But the gelatinous texture doesn't really agree with me, but I love mixing fruity flavors with the turkey. Now, take a piece of your sliced roasted chicken and kind of imagine Thanksgiving turkey. Now, I know it's a bit of a stretch because chicken has a lot more flavor than turkey, because turkey is quite bland. But what I want you to do is take the Pinot Noir and taste it while you have still a little piece of the chicken in your mouth. Do you see how the strawberry, light cherry, and slightly cranberry fruit of the Pinot Noir complements the chicken? And the weight of both, neither overpowers the other. This reminds me of the flavors I get at Thanksgiving, and you can replicate it at home. Pinot Noir also works very well with pork for this exact same reason. Pinot Noir and the white meat of pork are a classic pairing. I never would have thought of this until a few years ago when I went to an event put on by Co-Brand Corporation, which is an importer who has tons of Pinot Noirs in their portfolio. They put on a special event called Pinot and Pork, the pleasures of vine and swine. I think the catchphrase needed a little bit of work, but all of the flavors work together so well, and it really opened my mind to pairing wines with pork. The fruitiness of many wines can pair beautifully with white meats such as turkey, chicken, and pork. You do need to keep in mind, however, when complementing flavors, that the flavors have to match in intensity. Otherwise, flavors of one will totally overpower the other. The reason why the Pinot Noir works with the pork is that both of them are fairly equal in terms of weight, texture, and flavors complementing. This kind of match would also work with medium-bodied fruity reds like Barbera d'Asti, Beaujolais, Cru of Beaujolais, and a Côte d'Aron or Valpolicella. However, even though the spice and fruitiness of a Barossa Shiraz might work well in theory, the intensity of the flavors of the wine would totally overpower the chicken or the pork and leave you with just tasting nothing but fruit. Now remember when we tasted the Cabernet Sauvignon with the chicken earlier? You may want to do it again just to remember. The Cabernet Sauvignon overpowered the chicken in terms of weight, but it also overpowered it in terms of intensity of flavors. Now again, you may absolutely love Cabernet Sauvignon, and it may be totally okay for you to get those flavors of the Cab and overpowering the dish. You may think, mo Cab, mo better. The other night I had some seared scallops, and I really just wanted a Cab, so I ordered a Cab, and it totally didn't, pair with it. But if you do this and you want those flavors of Cab regardless of what you're pairing, understand that it's not doing anything for the chicken, and the experience is not as sensual as it could be for you. In this sense, it's just one-dimensional, just the wine. Contrasting is a bit different. Contrasting flavors is pairing, for example, fruit and spice. Let's say you take some spicy food, maybe an Indian dish such as a vindaloo or a strong curry, or a Chinese dish such as Szechuan pork or Kung Pao chicken. You may think, okay, match spice with spice and pair it with a powerful Syrah, which has that black pepper spice, or a California Zinfandel. Now, the only problem with that is that the spice and the accompanying salt will focus your palate entirely on the alcohol, and the fruit goes away. Now, taste the Cab that you have. This one's from California, so what I want you to do is feel the warmth of the alcohol in your palate. Now what I want you to do is take a bit of the barbecue sauce. I'm just going to dip my finger here. Now notice how spicy. Now, I asked you to get a spicy barbecue sauce, so you're going to get that thermo reaction on your tongue. But I don't want it to be nuclear for you, okay? I want it to be comfortable. Now what I want you to do is taste the Cab again. Now notice how the alcohol stands out a bit more. You get more of that warmth, that thermal reaction, and the fruitiness actually disappears. And that spice actually tells your tongue to focus on the alcohol, making it appear warmer than it is. For strongly spicy dishes, you're better off going with something to offset that spice, like sweetness. A good fit would be an off-dry or slightly sweet Riesling or Alsatian Gewürztraminer. The sweetness in the wine will complement the spice in the cuisine. For Gewürztraminer, especially the bold, lychee-like fruit with the hints of spice will complement the dishes quite well. Next time you go out to dinner and order something spicy, try this and see how it works for you. You may also have noticed the barbecue sauce has made the Cabernet Sauvignon taste a bit sour. This brings me to a set of warnings with food and wine pairings. You've heard of the good, the bad, and the ugly. Well, some of these are downright ugly. Let's take a look at one of the greatest holidays for couples, Valentine's Day. What are some of the typical gifts we give our sweeties? Why, chocolate, of course, and chocolate-covered strawberries. And what do you think we pair with that? Of course, we pair it with champagne. Pairing chocolate with champagne is actually one of my biggest pet peeves in the world of food and wine pairing. And let me show you why. What I want you to do is taste the champagne. Notice how delicate it is, the high acidity, the finesse of the mousse, those green apple tones, the minerality, that yeasty autolytic character. Now what I want you to do is take a piece of chocolate. And what I want you to do is let the chocolate melt on your tongue and have it really roll around your tongue in order to have it coat in a sweetness and really feel the texture of the chocolate. Now what I want you to do, while you still feel that sweetness and the texture, I want you to taste the champagne again. The chocolate is way too full-bodied for the champagne, for one. And the sweetness in the chocolate, especially if you have milk chocolate, makes the champagne taste completely sour. Now, I can understand the whole luxury thing around Valentine's Day. Champagne is luxurious, chocolate is luxurious, but for the love of God, don't put them together. To save you from that ugly experience, what I want you to do is taste the chocolate again. But this time, I want you to taste the ruby port. Now that's a beautiful pairing. The bitterness of the chocolate, especially if you have dark chocolate instead of milk chocolate, is offset by the sweetness of the port. Notice the complementing flavors of the rich, concentrated dark cherry and blackcurrant fruit of the port with those hints of licorice and how they work well together with the chocolate flavor. In addition, the alcohol in the port is complemented by the additional sweetness in the chocolate. Feel how long these flavors dance on your tongue. It's a gorgeous pairing. So for Valentine's Day, if you get your sweetie a box of chocolates, plan to share a bottle, maybe even a half bottle, of ruby port. Having said that, one of the most sensual experiences for food and wine pairing, and this might be for fun on Valentine's Day with your sweetie as well, is champagne and small raw oysters. No Tabasco, please, because that has a lot of spice. They match in weight and they contrast in texture. Have you ever had raw oysters and felt them slide down so smoothly and easily? The champagne not only makes the briny and oysters flavor pop because of the acidity and freshness, but it tickles your tongue, and the acidity prepares you for that next oyster. Now let's talk about some of the dangers of acidic foods. Strong acids in foods such as vinegar and salads can be overpowering and make the acid in the wine taste even more acidic. This fear has led to many restaurants in their pairing menus not to pair a wine with a salad at all. When cooking, pay attention to how much vinegar, lemon, or lime you're using, because combining a lot of vinegary acid plus the acid in the wine equals an even more intense perception of the acid than either of those by themselves. However, nowadays, with the creation of so many fruity vinaigrettes, where the fruit offsets the vinegar, and vinaigrettes have more oil in them to help balance it out, the acid in a dish plus acid of the wine equation yields less of a perception of acid in your mouth, not more. This is why the classic wines of Tuscany, made with the high acid red grape of Sangiovese, we discussed in lecture 14, is traditionally and classically paired with a high acid sauce like tomato sauce. The high acid of the wine and the high acid of the tomatoes somewhat cancel each other out. This also works because the weight and the texture and the flavors are in balance. Your tongue can perceive salt too. We mentioned before the danger that salt and spicy food can make your palate focus completely on the alcohol of the wine and diminish the other flavors. However, salt on its own can make the fruit flavors of the wine jump out, such as with the raw oysters and the champagne. Now try this test. Taste a salted almond and taste the cap. What did you notice? You're probably going to notice that the salt forces your tongue to focus on the bitterness, the tannins, the high level of tannins that you get in Cabernet Sauvignon. It actually makes them appear even more tannic and more bitter on your palate. Strong tannins also don't work well with oily fishes. Wines that are high in tannin, again, such as Cabernet Sauvignon or Nebbiolo, for example, get a terrible metallic taste when combined with an oily fish such as salmon. However, low tannin wines work just fine, such as Pinot Noir, Gamay, or Barbera. Coming back to the salt, though, the salt in food can be complemented by fruitiness in wines. I remember a few years ago, the popular appetizer was melon wrapped with prosciutto, a thinly sliced dry-cured ham from Italy. The fruitiness of the melon was complemented by the saltiness of the prosciutto. The same concept applies here and is the reason why stinky, salty blue cheeses such as Roquefort or Stilton pair well with sweet wines such as Sauterne and with port. The sweetness of the wines offsets the saltiness and focuses your palate on the fruitiness of the wines. There's obviously a lot more we could say about pairing, but this is enough to give you some solid ideas for ways to match wines at home or in a restaurant. You might also think ahead when you're going to a friend's house for dinner. So instead of just bringing a good wine, find out what's being served and pick out a wine for an amazing pairing. And speaking of food and wine, a new study in 2010 reported that women who drink alcohol in moderation, especially red wine, put on less weight and are less likely to become overweight compared to non-drinkers. Hopefully follow-up studies will conclude the same thing, but in the meantime, that's good news. So what are some of the fun ways to use your knowledge from this course? You can try all our pairing and tasting tips in your daily life, but I'd also encourage you to invite some friends over for a tasting party. Having people taste wines at different classification levels, say in Bordeaux or Burgundy, is one good idea that will help you develop your skills as you taste. Or some night you might pick one grape variety like Chardonnay or Cab and ask each person to bring that grape variety from a different region. This way you can taste the difference that terroir makes. Or another night you might have a regional theme like Tuscany or South Australia and then ask each person to pick up a different grape variety each, but it has to come from that region. Or you may have a blind wine party where each person brings his or her own wine, but it's wrapped in aluminum foil so no one can see the label. Then you can go through our quiz questions. Is it thin-skinned or thick-skinned? Is it warm climate or cool climate, etc.? And see how close you get. You're going to be amazed by how much your palate has improved. Here's another idea. If you may want your own blending party. What do I mean by that? Pick up 100% varietal wines, such as Cab, Merlot, Malbec, Petit Syrah, Zinfandel, so on and so forth. Taste each one on its own, and then tell each guest to make their own blend using these varietals. You would be astonished at how different each blend tastes, and it's so much fun. It's like kind of finger painting for adults. There's a quote attributed to Lord Maynard Keynes on his deathbed when he supposedly said, "My only regret is that I did not drink more champagne." Well, my only regret is that we don't have any more time to spend together. But if we did, I'd feel confident that we would spend it seeing, swirling, sniffing, sipping, and savoring. And a toast to you. To the sun that warmed the vineyards, to the juice that turned into wine. To the host who cracked the bottle and made it yours and mine.